was the first glass works in America?
What is speeding and improving school design?
How is a cigarette manufactured?
Where are young executive stars?
Industry Parade, Peabody Award winner for public service, produced on film each week by the National Association of Manufacturers.
April 1607. Moored in the James River of Virginia, the flagship Susan Constant and two smaller vessels of her fleet earn a lasting place in history by bringing to the New World the first English settlers in North America. After a winter voyage across 3,000 miles of stormy, perilous Atlantic, the ships stand watch over the beginnings of Jamestown and of a nation which, just 3.5 centuries later, would rank foremost among the world powers. Expressing joy at first sight of the fair meadows and the fresh waters running through the woods, the settlers went to work promptly, searching for gold, planting crops, and planning an industry. Guarded by a triangular stockade equipped with the weapons and armor of the day, the colonists spent much of their time and ingenuity fighting hostile Indians who lurked in those fair meadows and woods. But they also made progress with their plans for a factory and were busy gathering wood for its furnaces 12 years before the voyage of the Mayflower. By 1608, they had produced the first glass products, the first industrial products of any kind ever made in America, under a thatched roof using furnaces fashioned from clay and river boulders. Today's visitors to the historic spot find those earlier scenes authentically restored. On Glass House Point, where the name has endured, though not the original factory, they find a working reproduction of a glass factory of that period, with costumed artisans following the old procedures. One of the most popular exhibits in the restoration of Jamestown, which, as we've seen, also includes replicas of the first ships, the 17th century factory has been made possible by the Jamestown Glass House Foundation with the help of the glass industry. Here, only a few feet from the remains of those first furnaces, unearthed by archaeologists only recently, we see the manufacturing process underway, much as it must have been back in those early days. You might think the beads, so popular in the Indian trade, were a prime reason for selection of a glass factory for the settlers' first industrial enterprise. But the evidence indicates beads were not produced, pointing instead to the probability that the first products were glass bottles, turned out for shareholders back in England, simply because all the necessary materials were close at hand. At Jamestown today, a visitor may find out for himself that glass blowing in the old manner is a difficult art, made even more difficult at the start by famine, warfare, and disease. Difficult days for us to imagine, looking back from the comfort of a modern America to the beginnings of our industrial economy.
Industry believes that America's rights and freedoms can and will be preserved providing there is a steady flow of investment capital. There is the incentive to invest capital. There is freedom from undue government competition. These ideas and purposes have been the common aim of most Americans for generations. Our own successes and, in contrast, the miseries of other lands have made it clear that jobs are created only by full production. Only by producing more can we provide and divide more. We want these things so people may prosper.
Conference in an architect's office. The architect, brimming over with ideas, has trouble conveying them to his client, for the client is unable to visualize the new concepts from two-dimensional drawings alone, even when perspective is indicated. Actually, the architect himself is similarly handicapped, although to a lesser degree. Among the solutions to this double-barrel problem is that of the Detroit architectural firm of Eberle M. Associates. Here, as in any large company in this field, an extensive library makes available all sorts of information essential to the planning of a new school, let's say, designs for which must take into account things like climate, the nature and number of schools already in the area, probable growth of the community, and so on. As ideas for the actual structure itself are worked out on paper, they are simultaneously reproduced in scaled models of cardboard, paper, and plastic. The firm has on its staff specialists who concentrate on preparing these authentic, three-dimensional miniatures whose first use will be, by the architects themselves, in spotting possible imperfections in the plans. By the time final working drawings have been completed, any impossible or undesirable specifications are eliminated. At this stage, changes in the plans cost almost nothing. Later on, it would be another story. The miniature models can be partially dismantled to permit study and modification of internal as well as external design characteristics. For clients like the members of this school board, the value of the models is inestimable. They can actually see what the proposed buildings will look like and do not have to depend on verbal descriptions or sketches they don't fully understand. As America undergoes the greatest school building program in its history, it's well that we have architects with imagination and sound operating methods equal to the tremendous and very costly job ahead.
Industry on Parade visits what is said to be the most modern cigarette factory in the world. Here at the P. Lorillard Company plant in Greensboro, North Carolina, we see carefully aged, cured, and conditioned tobacco leaves being blended. This initial blending step consists of spreading the leaves evenly, type by type, and layer by layer in long bins. Not all the tobaccos in a blend are added here. Some, like the Burleys and the Turkish types, require special treatment to bring out their own individual flavors, burning qualities, aromas, or other characteristics. But eventually, all are brought together in proportions determined by the formula or recipe for a particular cigarette. After further conditioning, an operation that occurs many times before the tobacco is ready to be made into cigarettes, the leaves are shredded, or as they say here, they're cut. An amazing array of the most up-to-date machinery ensures that each process is carried out exactly as it should be. From here, the tobacco will move on to a mellowing 3-day rest, after which it will finally be ready to be made into cigarettes. Here on a tremendous production floor, row on row of machines turn out cigarettes as uniformly perfect as human ingenuity allows. Tobacco is deposited as needed at the top of each machine, and near the bottom, a reel of cigarette paper feeds first into a machine that prints the brand name, then into a funnel that coils the paper around a constantly descending cylinder of tobacco. To show us how fast the cigarettes are formed, a supervisor breaks the endless tube, then gets it flowing again into the machine which cuts it into cigarette size. For filter cigarettes, the filters, at first about 3 inches long, are sliced into shorter lengths and then placed into the tube, just a fraction of a second before it's closed and the cigarette is cut. Each filter section supplies the tips for 2 cigarettes. So after the cutting, every other cigarette must be flipped over. Innumerable checks are made on the cigarettes: size, weight, and uniformity. When a machine's output is found to be up to standard, as it usually is under the closely controlled conditions existing here, the cigarettes move on to the packaging machines. Filled trays are placed on overhead conveyors, and empty ones take their place. Despite all the automation, men and women, 1,000 of them or more, are still required to keep tabs on the operations of the machines. Now the packaging, another fascinating mechanical process. The machine counts out 20 cigarettes and wraps them in foil, paper wrapper, and tax stamp in less time than it takes to tell about it. What's more, it automatically rejects any imperfect package or even a single imperfect cigarette. "8,000 packs an hour roll off each packaging machine. Uniformly perfect, the packs move on to the cellophane machine, which also inserts a tear tape for convenient opening, after which they're ready for the cartons and the job is done. A truly impressive demonstration of painstaking precision accomplished at tremendous speed.
Over the years, industry has made great progress in establishing a plant environment which recognizes the importance and dignity of the employee as an individual. The highest level of steady work and pay, far better health and safety protection, benefit programs to safeguard him and his family, opportunities for education and training. These are just a few of the human relations advances which have given the employee a greater sense of satisfaction and security on the job.
Into the Denver headquarters of a coast-to-coast trucking firm rolls one of the company's big over-the-road carriers. On hand to greet the driver and discuss the trip are an executive and 2 of the dozen or more skyscraping young men whose athletic figures have become so familiar around the shops and offices of Denver-Chicago Trucking Company. These young men, like 6-foot 9-inch Terry Rand on the left, are executive trainees, talented college graduates who are being prepared to hold managerial positions in the organization. During his first year with the firm, Terry moves from one department to another, getting an overall idea of the many ramifications of the trucking business and also looking for the niche he feels he could most effectively fill. Truck routes, freight rates, labor contracts, government regulations, reports to shareholders, taxes. Terry learns that the business consists of a great deal more than trucks, trailers, and timetables. How did Terry Rand and the other trainees happen to be such tall individuals? It's no coincidence, for they're all former college basketball stars. Denver-Chicago President Kolowich, here meeting with a group of the trainees, found he could bring into the firm young men with top talent by letting them continue to engage in their favorite sport on teams carrying the company colors. And by the time their playing days are past, these nationally famous athletes will be well settled in good jobs in one of our most important industries.